morning, brother.
Hey.
Hey, man.
Hey. It's pastors and hoodies season again.
It's cold.
No, it's not cold. It's nice out.
This brother is cold.
This what is cold?
This brother.
Okay,
cold,
so
man.
I'm not wrong. There we go.
I'm tropical people, man. Hey, well, welcome to Driving Home Fall Season 2022, Episode 2. Remember, if you got any questions, you can always hit us up, 937-404-1207. And so far, we've been thankful for your participation.
Yeah, we got one question that came in. I think we're going to tackle in a couple weeks. We got Andrew Barry preaching this week, and I don't know what he's preaching on, but it'll be with a British accent. So it's going to sound cool.
Cool.
And then the week after that, we'll get back into 1 Corinthians 10. And a question that did come in was kind of over the larger part.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll tackle that question next time we do on 1 Corinthians 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, hey, man, I thought, amazing power for God to speak to his people, to convict, to encourage, to correct in 5 short verses. Because when you being from my position, you were sitting most of the time. Actually, you were standing most of the time. You were preaching.
Yeah.
But being out there and hearing sobs and blowings of noses and let me get that Kleenex. The word of God, so powerful to work in us in 5 short verses. It's amazing to see God at work in our church. I don't know how you felt about it.
Yeah, no, totally. I think overwhelmed by the end of the morning with just what a blessing Greenville Grace is. I think was talking to somebody else because it's funny, and I don't know. There is more emotion coming out of me than there used to be. I hadn't gotten much sleep the night before. That may have played part in it.
I would cry too if I didn't get much sleep.
It's been an emotionally draining, difficult season for us with some other things. And somebody else was talking about afterwards because people have noticed, that's a little bit different. I don't know that's it's not a goal. It's not what we're aiming for. I don't write my notes start crying. Because honestly, where I started crying didn't even necessarily make sense to me. Why am I crying right now? But somebody on the way out the door, I thought they hit it so well. They said, they'd had a similar experience where they said, I'd gone through just a tough week and said, I got up in front of the body and looked out and you just see all of this people that you love and that love you. And they said it's tears of blessing. It's not just, anguish. And that's exactly what it was. I mean, it was, and then the number of people that just gave a hug or just a kind word or just, that was oh my goodness, it just, it was incredible. And then finding that the passage, and this is just the grace of God in our lives, the prep for the passage to preach it provided the opportunity for God to just be kind of all week saying to me, this is what y'all be doing, and it's good for your soul if you would. That was great to find difficult seasons and yet say, okay, wait, but the goal is to look for how I already see the character and nature of Christ present.
And I think that's such a sweet blessing for the example you gave, that you're looking out to your brothers and sisters and they love you and you love them tremendously. And they are a great church. This is not because of all what we're doing, not because the music is great, because sometimes it's not, not because the preaching is great, because sometimes it's not, but it is really a picture of before heaven of our unity in Christ, being with him and being made whole and being full. And so I think the blessing is we get a glimpse of that even now. And I think what you were saying was that a glimpse of that fullness of being fully loved and then loved by and loving. And not every church or pastor gets to experience that.
Yeah, that's true.
Because I'm on Facebook groups of Brian Croft put one together. Shepherd. Anyway, and pastors will say, hey, pray for me, brother. I'm going into a difficult meeting. I got to do this. And I'm thinking, oh, my heart just drops for them. Thank the Lord that we're not experiencing any of those controversies here. That, man, if there's an issue, we're bringing it to each other in love.
Yeah.
Right. There's no agenda. Not to say we're not sinful. There's no like undercutting. Like we're like trying to work the gospel.
Yeah. I think that's
yeah.
one of the things, like, I guess if you want to do the cutting room floor thing, that would just been more of the buildup of what's happening in Exodus that Paul's referring to. It's a trial. It's a wondering, right, for them to be going through the wilderness, and it takes 40 years to do it. And some of that is discipline from the Lord of why it's taken 40. We have those seasons. It certainly, as an elder team and as a church, we've had awkward meetings, difficult things, things that are hard. And yet part of the mindset is knowing God's at work in the midst of it. Not just get through this and I'm sure something will turn out for good, or get through this and you're going to get through this. And that's just the good news itself. Even though those are sometimes the good news you see at the moment. It's also knowing, like, this isn't God's working in your life. It's a commercial break. So he runs to the fridge to get himself something. Your life falls apart and he gets back and it's like, oh, okay, don't worry. I'm God. I can clean this up. We can work this around and move it. But it's like in those seasons of difficulty and struggle, he's working in those seasons are there for the work to be done. And I think that's the other thing that's such a blessing is, like, by God's grace, because I don't know any other answer. Like when we as an elder team have gone through difficult seasons, we're trying to work things out together, or it's hard, something hard's happening in the church, we're having to respond to discipline or whatever it might be. God has blessed us with it, drawing us closer together than driving us apart.
Amen.
And that's nothing but a gift from him. But I think sometimes it's a reminder to us of, like, I don't like suffering. I don't like pain. I don't like hard seasons. And my gut inclination is like, how do I get out of this? Right. How do we move on? How do we
press the eject button?
Exactly.
Hopefully a door opens up in the middle of the floor and I can slide and squeeze through, get out of there.
Yeah. But think about what happened. I mean, the wandering for the Israelites it was a discipline from God because of the fact that he was not pleased with them. There was like a generation who was not coming to him by faith. What do we see follow it? A whole group of people enter the promised land and exercise faith and stepping into it, and it gets established, and the priesthood gets, its local region and works through that, and God works in the next generation, even though the preceding generation wasn't following him at all. And you got to think part of that got established in the middle of the wilderness journey.
Not to mention the journey around other nations. Who got to see, who got to have a front row view of God's provision. And so what's that in the trial, the provision, I'm with you. And so how can we relate that to our own trials and people who are watching? You're going through, I'm going through. And we have a church, we have the world, we have people who are watching in and looking at our response, looking at God's response to our our situation.
Right. And it ties all together, right? So the previous weeks was on, to the Jew, I am a Jew, to the Gentile, or those outside the law, I live outside the law, not meaning outside of all law, right? He kind of does all that, but I can do all those things so that I might win some. So evangelism needs to take place. Gospel communication needs to take place. But I think sometimes as Christians, because we can't handle a lot on our plate at once. And it feels like sometimes we vacillate one way or the other of, like, I need to be outreach minded and thinking about preaching the gospel to others, or I just need to take care of myself and my faith and grow. And those aren't meant to be tensions. They're meant to work together. And so if your life is consumed with idols You're chasing after the next thing, but you sit down with somebody else and tell them, let me tell you what should be the number one priority in your life. And yet they're looking at you and going, I don't see it from you.
Yeah.
It's going to fall on deaf ears.
Man,
and the flip side, if I'm pursuing Christ, but I'm not talking about Christ to other people, am I really pursuing Christ? Because out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Wow. So, I think even in the flow of what Paul's done, it's that's the one thing that can happen with sequential exposition that gets lost, is we're taking smaller chunks. And it could almost feel like Paul wrote them as these smaller sermon outlines for us when he didn't. It's a letter that flows. And man, as we're talking about Paul's whole drive for why he didn't receive wages from the Corinthians and everything was for the sake of the gospel being clear to them. And now he's immediately transitioning into, and if the gospel's clear, it's going to make an impact on you, and you can learn from what we've seen before.
Yeah. I mean, man, I'm going to confess to you. I'm going to confess to you, my brothers and sisters, man, this came at a good time. Like it's kind of funny how God will prepare you before the situation. So we've been waiting for Lisa's job at IU to accept her. And she finally got an acceptance letter. And she had put in with her boss how much she wanted, and it was vastly lower than what we desired. And so when I should have been thankful, guess what I do? I didn't grumble, I didn't complain verbally, but in my heart I'm thinking, oh man, I wish. I wish we had that. Look at all the things we could have done.
You could have bought your friend a Bronco.
I could have, man. But look, it was $1 or $2 over what Lisa already makes. So there's the blessing, there's the provision, there's God providing. But my heart is inclined to see what I'm not getting. And the Lord quickly brought me to, yesterday. We heard the news to this. I'm still providing, and yet you're not looking to me and seeing what I'm doing. And so this was very convicting for me so it's just funny how the Lord's comical in ways where he'll drop something on you like, oh, I don't know how this applies. Oh, now I see how it applies.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what you got, anything else from your devotions or study or anything like that?
No, I think just we did cut off kind of in the middle of the discussion. I even joked somebody in our life group went to verse 6, and it kind of helped draw out that thing going a little bit further. And I think we'll see that in a couple of weeks of like the scriptures, and especially kind of the Old Testament, can serve as a diagnostic tool. You just ask the generic question, do you have an idolatry problem? And if you might go, okay, well, theologically, I know I probably do. I've read enough passages. I've, read a Tim Keller book that told me about my idols, but may not spot. Whereas then what he's going to do is start saying, well, here's how their idolatry showed up. And here's another way it showed up. And here's another way it showed up, that draws us to the recognition of like, oh, okay, I can run that same diagnostic through me. And it's sort of what you were saying of, even it might not come out in actions, but I know what's going on in the heart. Right. And so we'll kind of step into that as well and kind of walk through. But I think one of the coolest things that came out of this, even because I don't think I was raised with a perspective that looked for Jesus in the Old Testament. Because I think that was viewed when I was growing up as putting Jesus in the Old Testament. Like, oh, you take the story and you make it into an allegory. You kind of, turn the story into something it wasn't quite, so that it kind of fits this higher spiritual meaning, and you lose. So that if I look for Christ in the story of Abraham and Isaac on the mountain, I'm suddenly like denying that Abraham actually existed, or that account took place. Instead of like I think where we land now, understanding the scriptures and passages like this, that I think Paul gives us permission to say, like, go back in the Old Testament, and you don't have to do weird connections. Like one of the classic ones is like, well, Rahab ties a scarlet thread around the window, and that's scarlet because it matches the blood of Christ. And so she's just demonstrating, and that's how we get to Jesus. And it's like, we don't have to do that. Maybe it's scarlet because it stood out. Like you could see it against a gray wall, because it would be scarlet and gray because that's the Buckeyes. But, maybe that's why it's there. We can still get to Jesus though. Because who was with them when he was parting the Red Sea? Jesus. And so right before they come to Jericho, who's with them when the Jordan River parts so they can cross over? That's got to be Jesus too, right? So he's there. Then there's this response to, what do we typically do when we face sin? Resist, fight. What did the people in Jericho do when they knew that God's righteous people were coming around them? The people that had clearly have the presence of God with them that's visible, like this 1 Corinthians 10 passage, by seeing God do miraculous things. They shut the doors up and got ready for a war. They were ready to fight. And there's one woman who by faith says, I'm not going to fight. I surrender. I submit myself. That's where you see Jesus. Amen. That he's always willing to rescue and adopt those who bow the knee to him. Which comes to what you're saying of, like, again, that life and testimony has an outreach impact. Rahab had heard, that's why the people had all heard, and they were terrified, locked up the doors. But one person, by the grace of God, is looking and going, yeah, I don't want to mess with this God. How about I join his team? Yes. Like, how about I actually submit to this and becomes part of the bloodline of Jesus? Amen. Like, that's the other thing that's super cool. We see Jesus is there in that the triune God is the same, is responding, is seeking to redeem people. So we see Jesus is there. And then we also see she's part of what leads to the physical lineage for Jesus. Wow. And I love that. I love being able now to go back to the Old Testament, and it gets grander. Like, you go to Abraham and Isaac, and it's like, well, is Isaac the model of Jesus because he's the one carrying the wood up the hill? Sure. And knowing his father's desire and being willing to submit to it? Absolutely. Or is Jesus the ram in the thicket that becomes the sacrifice? Absolutely. Sure. He is, and you get to see those models everywhere, not because we're making the Bible figurative. And it's a hard thing. Like, it requires a transition of, if I go to the Bible thinking I'm the central character, or if I go about my life thinking I'm the central character, then I open this book up and I keep looking for illustrations of me. Yeah. And I think I see them everywhere with the heroes and the contrast with the failures, right? Yes. But if I understand that even in my own life, I'm not the central character. Yeah. This isn't primarily about me. This is about glorifying Christ. Then when I open his book, I find him. And in that, it's not just a cold academic study, right? I find him, and I find him seeking me. I find him rescuing me. I find him protecting me. I find him guiding me. All those things we went through in 1 Corinthians 10, I find him there, and I find him faithful. Yeah. It's just such a, I would say, more fun way to read our Bible, right? It's just so good for our souls. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, man.
Yeah.
So I don't have to worry about my pay. The Lord is doing the work.
The Lord's providing.
He's providing.
Yeah.
And no matter what we get, it's going to be all right, because he's going to take care of his own. So thank you for that, man.
Yeah.
Well, we enjoyed ourselves, and we hope you enjoyed it. Remember, hit us up, 937-404-1207. We love you immensely. Yeah. Can't wait to worship with you on Sunday.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And we got the berries coming.
We got Andrew, Tim's dad. So Tim preached a while ago in Wolverhampton. His mom and dad are coming. Okay. He's, like I say, he's the one that's got the British accent. So he'll say the same things you hear every week here, but it's going to sound so much deeper and smarter and poetic.
All right. Maybe we can get a little Sean Connery going on.
There you go. I love him. He's our uncle. He's probably a little more Mr. Bean than he is James Bond, but Don't tell him I said that.
Hopefully-
We're supposed to on the internet, but
Hopefully
don't
he's
tell
not
him I said
watching
that.
this.
Yeah.
I'll try to edit that part out. Hey, well, remember, guys, Christ has done all the work.
We're just driving home.
Peace.